Hi ladies, I am so excited to bring you our incredible breastfeeding series with Amberley Harris. We have 5 podcast episodes in this series, plus a bonus 6th episode, which is exclusive just to Posse members. Now, to kick off this first episode, we are discussing Breastfeeding 101, the foundational knowledge that you'll need to navigate this breastfeeding journey well. Amberley talks us through the 5 things that you need to know to encourage a strong and confident breastfeeding relationship, the supply and demand concept when it comes to lactation and milk making, the importance of the breast not just as a food source but also for comfort and connection, and the importance of baby-led attachment. Amberley will also provide us with a video demonstration of baby-led attachment and what to look for with the mouth and the nipple position in the 6th bonus episode if you want to check that out. In later episodes in this podcast series, we will be covering the breast crawl, breastfeeding after a C-section, mastitis, nipple damage, milk supply issues, antenatal expressing, pumping, and Amberley's favorite pump recommendation. And we will be busting through a whole bunch of breastfeeding myths. So trust me, there are some funny ones in there. So grab a cuppa, sit back, and enjoy this breastfeeding series. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Amberley. I'm so excited to have you here. As I just mentioned to you before, I just want to let everyone know how much I love you. I think you are like my go-to breastfeeding guru on the Instagram I sound like an old woman, on the gram. And I just think you're such a wealth of knowledge, and what I love about you is that you are just super friendly and you kind of hold this space for women just to be like, this is my problem, I know you're not going to judge me, you're just going to help me through it, and you're just there to help women. You can tell that you're so passionate about breastfeeding. You've got some incredible projects on the go, and I just think that you're the perfect person to teach all these wonderful ladies about everything to do with breastfeeding. So thank you for coming on.
Yay, what a great introduction. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And I love your work, and I think our work really aligns, and it's sort of a continuation of your work, and then my work starts, and it's so great that we can be there to support mothers on that mothering continuum.
100%, yes. We are on the same page with that. So let's start with Breastfeeding 101. So I think I used to think it was assumed that women knew what they were doing, and I've really come to realize now that there's a real gap in knowledge, and I think it's not necessarily something that we should assume that women know when they are pregnant, especially when it's their first baby. So let's start with Breastfeeding 101, the basics of breastfeeding. Now, what do you think is the most important things that women should know to set themselves up for a successful and confident breastfeeding relationship?
Perfect. So I've got 5 tips that I usually talk mothers through if they're sort of just wanting to start from the start and be like, what are the main things I could do? So I think maybe I'll cover those because that's probably a good place to start. So the first one is that if you can, aim for a normal physiological labour, a labour where, ideally there's no medical interventions that, are unnecessary. So if you can, that would be like the first part of it. Number 2 is sort of similarly aligned with that first point, is hoping to go into spontaneous labour. So really let your baby be the driver of when labour happens. Let them, be the one responsible for that trigger of labour, because then we know your baby's going to be ready for that transition into the world, and they're going to be more likely to be really interested and motivated to breastfeed when they're first born. Number 3 is do the breast crawl. So learn about the breast crawl, which is this amazing sequence that all babies are very capable of doing. Some mothers don't know about it. So, learn about it, do some research, look into some resources where you can actually see what it looks like and what it's going to, basically involve, so that you can let your baby do it organically.
And we will be chatting about that a little bit later on. We'll go into a bit more detail because I think that is something that's you're an expert in. You explain very well, and I think it's something that most women have never, ever heard of.
Yeah.
So that will be great to dive into. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I love the breast crawl. I think it's one of the things that I love talking about the most because it's so important and it's so commonly overlooked in the maternity setting. So yeah. Number 4 is, if you can, avoid dummies, bottles and formula, just because of the way these can negatively impact your breastfeeding relationship. And number 5 is seek support. Really important to be able to, there's so many different breastfeeding experts around, and we're not going to gel with everyone. So find someone that you really like, that, you trust and you connect with, and you think, perfect, I'm going to work with you as a way to sort of have that professional support and help me achieve my breastfeeding goals.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because I think if you, say, try someone and you don't gel with them and you don't like their ethos, you might think that all help is lost then, and that you have to go it alone, whereas there's so many wonderful practitioners out there. And would you advise someone to see a lactation consultant specifically, or is there a range of women, professionals for them to seek help with?
For sure. That's a really good question. So I am a midwife in private practice, and I'm what's called an endorsed midwife. So I've done some extra studies so that I can prescribe medications, I can order diagnostics like pathology or ultrasound, and I can give Medicare rebates to all my clients. So my work is in a midwife scope of practice, primarily in the first 6 weeks. And so really, as midwives, we work more on the fundamentals of breastfeeding, on positioning and attachment, and sort of teaching mothers that from the start. Lactation consultants are a different skill set. They're amazing, and I collaborate with a few if I need to. And their scope of practice is very similar to us, but they also work a lot on the problem solving, on when things are sort of going not the way you planned, on sort of how to get things back on track. So I think it's important to kind of have access to both, to be able to work with midwives at the start. And there's certainly, in my private practice, I don't think I've had any actually examples where I haven't been able to help mothers and I've had to refer to a lactation consultant, but nonetheless I work with them. Like, we definitely collaborate if there's any things that I need help with. So I think it's good to work with your midwives, like whether you've built a rapport with your midwife in pregnancy when you first have your baby, and your midwife is sort of your gateway to further help if you need something as well, which is really cool.
And I like that ethos as well about, you're almost there to try and prevent issues if possible. So by educating women and giving them the knowledge they need, hopefully, and it's not always guaranteed, but hopefully it means that you don't actually need to then problem solve, because you've set yourself up for success. And I sort of have the same motto when it comes to physiotherapy. So prevention is a lot better than the cure. So if you can actually stop these problems from happening potentially in the first place by arming yourself with knowledge and confidence, it can make for a much smoother journey. And again, that's not to say that no one will get problems, because breastfeeding can be very tricky for some women, but I think, knowledge is power. And I think you're very good at helping women to understand the breastfeeding journey. So let's dive into, because I remember this really confused me when I had my first son, supply demand. So let's talk about the actual physiology of breastfeeding and lactation and milk coming in. And actually, let's start at milk coming in. So let's talk about when milk comes in, roughly when to expect that, and the changes you might feel mentally, physically in your body when that happens.
Yeah, perfect. What I might do is start further back than the milk coming in and maybe talk about this. So lactation is a process called lactogenesis, and there's sort of 3 key stages that are involved in this. So the first stage happens in pregnancy, which is when we expect that under the influence of pregnancy hormone, our boobs change. They get bigger. The nipple and areola gets darker to help our baby be able to see. And so we do expect that, your boobs alter in pregnancy. So that's the first stage. So if your boobs change in pregnancy, it's a good thing, okay? And then the second stage happens when basically our milk comes in. And so that's sort of on day 3 to 5. It's different for every mother. Some mothers, it's this really obvious event that they kind of wake up in the morning and they feel like they've had breast implants and their boobs are ginormous. And then there's...
I remember that.
You were one of those. And then there's mothers who their boobs take several days to fill. So they don't have this really obvious thing happen. But over, many days, everyone's different, but they slowly notice their milk come in. So there's no right or wrong. That's just the way milk comes in for every mother is different. So that's the second stage that we expect to at least notice our milk has come in. And then the third stage of lactation happens. It's not something we notice so much ourselves, but it's when our babies are about 2 weeks of age. And what happens is our breasts basically shift from making what's called transition milk to mature milk. And we know that's working because our babies around that stage get back to their birth weight, and then they go on and continue to gain weight and thrive. So then we know those 3 key stages of lactation are working.
Okay, that's really, that's the first time I ever learnt that. There you go.
Good.
That's really, really interesting. So when it comes to supply and demand, because I know I get a lot of questions coming through on pumping, and I know a lot of women are confused about this. Can you just discuss, for anyone who hasn't heard about that and how that supply demand system works, can you explain that to us, please?
Yes, for sure. So yeah, with supply and demand, the idea is that our babies are the ones that go to the breast, they remove the colostrum and then the milk as well when the milk comes in. And then what that does is it sends signals to our breasts to say, I need to make more. So it basically, all the hormones for lactation are in our pituitary gland, which is at the base of the skull. And so oxytocin and prolactin are the really important ones. And it basically triggers the milk-making cells in our breast to say, this milk has been removed, so I need to therefore make more. And that's basically how supply and demand works. So that's a big part of the driver of our supply. So even though we have the boobs, our babies are responsible for the supply. They are the drivers of the supply, which is why the best thing we can do is follow our baby's lead and just breastfeed on demand. I even say breastfeeding more than just demand, like whenever your baby sort of squirms or wiggles or makes a sound in those early days, if you can just frequently breastfeed, it does nothing but good things. It helps you bring in a really abundant milk supply, and breastfeeding pretty much solves like 99% of your baby's problems. So it's just like the best thing ever.
I used to joke that my parenting style was parent by boob, and that if that didn't work, I had nothing else up my sleeve.
Yeah, my repertoire is like that. That's it. Yeah, I'm out.
And we are going to touch on quite a number of breastfeeding myths later, because I've come to realize after asking my audience that there's a lot out there, a lot of misinformation. But just coming back to what you said about you can't do any wrong, to confirm, you cannot overfeed your newborn, can you?
Such a good question. No, you can't overfeed a breastfed baby. Like, you just don't need to be worried about that. Certainly down the track, weeks down the track, if you think my baby's troubled with wind and I have an oversupply, like there might be other things to unpack. Maybe the position that you're feeding your baby and you need to be a bit more upright if you have a quick letdown. So I guess I'm basically explaining with that there's other things that might be involved, not that you're overfeeding your baby, because breastfed babies, they work very hard to remove the milk from the breast, and if they are not that hungry or motivated to keep feeding, they will just come off.
Yes.
By comparison with a bottle, you can overfeed, you can overstretch a baby's tummy because the milk travels much quicker down through the teat. They can drink a huge amount in a very short space of time, and they will either keep it in and have really bad belly pains, or they might just bring it all back up. So that definitely is a different story to breastfeeding.
And that's probably a good segue into cluster feeding, which a lot of women also ask me about. What can you expect with cluster feeding? So you're obviously saying supply and demand. In those early days, the baby will dictate how much they want to take in. Does a cluster-fed baby mean they're hungry, that you're not getting enough milk? Like, what's the down low on cluster feeding?
So cluster feeding is very normal newborn behaviour, and typically babies cluster feed young babies in the afternoon and the evening. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first reason is that they're usually overtired, they're overstimulated, and it's just that time in the day where there's a lot going on, and breastfeeding is a way to sort of really calm their central nervous system. So it's a lot about comfort at that time of the day. It's not always about milk supply. However, there's the other side of it too, is that as mothers, we make most of our milk at night when we sleep, and when we wake in the morning, we have the most amount of milk available in the 24-hour period. So as the day wears on, we have less milk available, and in the evenings, that's when our boobs typically are softer. There's not as much supply. We still have milk there, but it's not as abundant. And so that's another reason our babies can be a bit fussy, and it definitely makes us question our milk supply. But I think what's important is to look at over the 24-hour period, If you're only thinking, oh, my boobs feel quite soft in the evening, you can at least say to yourself, well, they're supposed to, like, that's really normal. And my baby's cluster feeding probably because, yeah, they want me to make more milk. They're actually trying to send more signals to my boobs to say, can we up the supply at this time of the day? But also maybe it's nothing to do with supply. Maybe it's just some stuff that they've got going on that they're just wanting you to help them and you to provide some comfort and closeness and connection.
I think that's a really good point, because I know a lot of women do question their supply because they think that baby's hungry because there's obviously not enough milk, and then they start to lose their confidence and they start to feel like they're not doing a very good job. But I guess if we stop thinking about breasts as just food and remember that they are for comfort, that's probably a really good point, that there's two reasons, and comfort is a huge part of the fourth trimester and them wanting to just feel safe and secure, and it's not necessarily a reflection on your milk supply. And I know a lot of women really struggle over this, and I'm sure you see it in your consults all the time, but feeling like they just don't have a good enough supply. And then that's probably confounded because then when you pump and you all of a sudden see a number next to your supply, which I don't think is necessarily indicative of because if I went by what I pump, I would think I had terrible milk supply, but my kids are all on the 95th percentile for weight, and like they get so much great milk. But when I pump, I just don't get very much out. And I'm glad I have the confidence and knowledge to know that that's not indicative of my milk supply, because otherwise I can see how straight away you would question, oh God, I'm not giving, if I'm only getting 80 mils when I pump, obviously my baby's not getting enough. So I think that's really good to know and to remember for new mums that it's not just hunger, it is comfort as well. And if your baby's ticking all the boxes, they're happy, they're well, they've got wet nappies, all of that, then they're obviously getting what they need. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, so many good points in there, Laura.
Minefield. I just remember when I had Mussy, and I just remember thinking, fortunately my mum is a midwife and maternal and child health nurse, so I just had like the jackpot when it came to support. But I just know that it was a bit of a minefield, and I remember thinking, I don't know what's normal and what's not normal, and it's a minefield. But let's talk about latch, Amberley, because I know that's another big thing. I had never learnt about this, and it's not until midwife showed me this in the hospital that I went, oh, that's so interesting. And we're just going to talk about it now. We are going to do an actual practical demo later with your fake boob and all of that.
Sure.
But can you just talk us through, again, like let's just think basics, the 101 of what a new mum needs to know when it comes to baby latch.
Okay. So there's a couple of different schools of thought with this. What I tend to teach my clients from the beginning is something called baby-led attachment, which is when your baby basically does the breast crawl. The breast crawl is reproducible for many months, roughly the fourth trimester. So if you put your baby in the center of your chest and let them do the breast crawl, and then I always like to see how each baby goes, whether they are able to self-attach. Because a baby-led attachment is a baby using their instincts. It's basically using that genetic blueprint for breastfeeding that they've been born with. And so we want to see, because we know that if a baby has the chance to do that, they're going to be more likely to have a big wide open mouth, to be really alert, to get on properly, so to not be nipple feeding but be breastfeeding. And so they're going to be less likely to damage mum's nipple, they're going to be more likely to drain the breast effectively. There's so many benefits to a baby-led attachment if they can get on properly. Now, if a baby can't get on properly, which is when I'm always there to support mum, so maybe they can't get on properly because they've got a little mouth, or maybe it's a mum thing, maybe just the shape of a mother's breast or the length of her nipple is making it a bit tricky for a baby to get on properly. Maybe the baby's got jaundice and is really sleepy, or has lost a bit more weight than normal, and they're not so motivated to breastfeed. So there's plenty of reasons why, if that doesn't work out, I will teach mothers the cross cradle hold, which is where they hold their baby and shape their breast and help their baby get on properly. But basically there's not sort of like a just do this, everyone does this. Yes. I always like to talk about baby-led attachment first, and if they can't get on properly, then I go in and help with other ways.
And that's why I love you, because you're so sensible, because I think some women can prescribe a black and white approach where it's the breast crawl and the baby-led attachment, and that's it. And so you feel like a failure if that hasn't worked for you. But you're saying that's plan A, and if that doesn't work, there's plan B, and that's a really great option too. So I think that's really good to know. wasn't that just a super practical and easy way to understand the basics of breastfeeding? Speaking for myself, I felt totally clueless when I was pregnant with my first because I hadn't seen a lot of friends or family members breastfeeding. I hadn't seen a baby latch with my own eyes. I hadn't heard any stories about breastfeeding. And I just think that Amberley explains breastfeeding and lactation in such an easy to understand way. So I hope that you also learned something from this episode. If you liked what you saw today, Amberley's antenatal breastfeeding class is also up inside the resources library for all members to enjoy. Now, this was a recording of the live Facebook session that Amberley did, and it's been given a lot of great feedback so far. So definitely go check that out. I cannot wait to share episode 2 with you, where Amberley will be discussing everything to do with the breast crawl. We chat about why it is so important to help establish a good breastfeeding relationship and what you can realistically expect to happen. It has personally inspired me to try a breast crawl with my next baby. So thanks for watching, and I will catch you soon.